in one of the oldest tapes of his that I've listened to from India in whatever, 1967, he said, the difference between this and that, meaning him and me, us, whatever, others, is that this is functional and that's ideational. And that's the only difference.
Hmm.
And on his deathbed, I swear to God, the exact phrasing came out.
Louis Brawley, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Certainly, Brian. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I've wanted to talk to you for a while because you're one of the few people I've met online who spent time with this character, UG Krishnamurti, who has been a pretty big influence in my life, I'd say. I never met him, but I hung out with somebody who spent time with him and got me interested in his, I don't know, his ideas. It's
Yeah, it's
always
hard to put a word to it. Yeah.
yeah, got me interested in like his influence on him and led me to, watch a lot of videos with him and read the books that were transcripts of conversations with him and stuff. But it's nice to talk to people who actually spend time with him.
Who was this fellow that you knew?
Mark Whitwell, he's a yoga
Oh,
teacher
of
that
course. Sure.
I worked with for some years.
I know
Yeah.
Mark. Yeah. Not very well, but I know him. I've met him a couple times.
Yeah, you guys were probably hanging around UG around the same period, I guess.
Well, he met UG in the 70s, is my understanding, way before I did,
Hmm.
in Madras, I think, when he was teaching with Desikachar, I want to say.
Hmm.
And then when I met UG was 2003 or so, and Mark was he came a couple times for an afternoon, but that was about it.
Hmm.
That's
Yeah.
as much as I ever saw him. So
Well, if you would tell us about how you met UG, what led you to the meeting?
sure, I was exposed to Jiddu Krishnamurti when I was in college in the 70s. And I actually went out and heard him speak in California. I was very impressed with his work, with his he seems to have had a teaching. I mean, I could say that now in retrospect. And because of that, um, I had a pretty immersive exposure to him. I got really into it. I read his books. I saw him at Madison Square Garden. Then I went to see him in California for he gave talks for a week, and he was pretty old at that point, obviously. And
Hmm.
then he died, and I I regretted never having gotten a chance to sit down with the guy.
Hmm.
But he was not an easy person to approach at that point. I don't
Yeah,
know.
he had a lot of people around him, right?
Yeah, yeah, and it was a big organization.
Yeah, did you see him in Ojai at Pepper Tree or the Krishnamurti Foundation place?
Yeah.
Yeah, I taught yoga at the Pepper Tree a few times with Mark. So
What's
there's a
Pepper Tree? I don't know that place.
it's called the Pepper Tree Retreat. It's in Ojai, and it was like a house where I guess Jay Krishnamurti would stay, and once he died, he bequeathed it to the foundation, and it's kind of like a teaching center there. It's a really beautiful little
Oh, yeah,
place.
Pepper Tree now. Wow. So that house, actually, an old friend of Yuji's worked on that house,
Hmm.
carpenter. Before he met Yuji, he knew JK. So funny how tight knit that community is. And there was a
Hmm.
big pepper tree. That was he had some experience there, I think. And then
Yeah,
it
it's like his
got
version of
lightning.
his Bodhi tree was the pepper tree.
Yeah.
But yeah,
So,
it's this big beautiful tree that is a pepper tree. So you got like red peppercorns that grow on it, and just gives off this beautiful odor. It's really nice.
wow. I thought that had been hit by lightning and died.
Oh, is
Maybe
that part of the mythology?
yeah, I mean, it's like the post JK mythology. Maybe there was another tree out there.
Yeah, I
Uh,
mean, there's probably more than one pepper tree. I don't know. I just
yeah,
remember that there was
could
pepper
be.
trees there, and they're lovely.
It's a beautiful place, Ojai, that's for sure. Well, anyway, I was pretty involved with JK for quite a while, and then I got frustrated and put it away. And years later, I reignited an interest and I got pretty involved and I went to some discussion groups and whatnot. And just about that time, I saw Yuji's website. And that's when so when I read that, my initial reaction was negative because I thought it just looked like he was saying, it kind of looked like he was saying the same thing. But then I started to read the books, which were all online at that point, and I sensed something really different. Um, and so that at that point, there was a number on the website. Professor Narayan Murthy was a friend of his who had set up the website, and I asked Murthy if I wrote to Murthy and I said, is there any way to get in touch with this guy? And he immediately gave me a phone number for a woman in New York. I called her. She was extremely welcoming, and then within a few months, he came to the city and I met him. And it was like the opposite sort of experience with JK, where, with Yuji, it was just an immediate access. I called him on the phone. He picked up the phone. We had a conversation. When I hung up the phone, I was kind of in shock. The guy actually talked to me on the phone. And then when I went to see him in New York, I met him at what was then the Southgate Hotel. It's now been through several different managements, ownership, but it's still there. The building is still there. It's the opposite corner to Madison Square Garden, where I saw Jiddu Krishnamurti speak for the first time, which always significant to me because, these guys played such a big role in my life, and they were really the only two serious spiritual teachers that I ever had. So
Yeah, it's kind of poetic that it was the other side of the street.
and in a funny way, the other side of the coin, like Jiddu was this giant organization, inapproachable, standing up on the stage or sitting on the stage, and Yuji was, in a room with 6 people on the couch for free, and total access.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, at that point in his life, I think I got in just at the cusp of him kind of winding down the operation. I spent 5 years with him, the last 5 years of his life. And by that point, he never had many people around him to begin with, but I think he was less and less interested in gathering people. And I don't think he ever really tried to do that anyway. He gave one public speech in India, at the Indian Institute of Culture, and that was in 1967 or 8, at the insistence of some people, and he never did it again. The hall was packed, and many of his lifelong followers came from that meeting right there. Like they came back for the next however many years he was there. So yeah, it was a very, very different thing, and it felt like I really stepped into the real thing when I met him. I can't justify that, but I wrote a book about it because I was trying to figure out what exactly do I mean when I say that. And I think a lot of it is that I had done so much reading and I tried many things. Other people have tried more than me, I'm sure, but meditation and seeing Jiddu Krishnamurti and doing a Zen meditation thing, and just reading about it all the time, and the whole idea of what I thought of as enlightenment really seemed to embody something the way he was.
Now, what were you looking for in the seeking? Like when we say enlightenment, I mean, what were you actually looking for? Was it relief from pain or some higher state or what?
Well, I've always been convinced that there's a as human beings we have a certain capacity, and I've never felt And I had this feeling in childhood and onward that were really that I was in touch with that capacity, that I was living life at its fullest. And I tried to do that in different ways, but they didn't really seem to, yeah, nothing seemed to work.
Hmm. Like
And,
was it just a general sense that like there's something more available and I'm not quite experiencing it?
yeah,
Whatever that more is, like it's unclear, right? But it's just there should be something more going on here.
yeah. I mean, growing up and experiencing the world, you have a kind of limited. I mean, there's all these rules on things, and language has a certain influence over us. And I remember being in high school, actually, it's this long ago. I remember being in high school studying um, etymology, which is the foundation of language. And at some point, it occurred to me, we were reviewing like, okay, this is the origin of this word, and that word came from Latin, and that one came from Greek. And it occurred to me, like, at some point, somebody said this word, chair, means chair. The word for breath is going to be this word. And I realized that my consciousness, I don't know if I would have articulated it like this, but the picture was your consciousness is a limited invention. It's to some degree invented by what you've learned. So that information comes from a limited source, another person, and is attempting to address the unlimited experience of being alive. It's not attempting it, it's a tool within that
Hmm.
context. But life itself is so unfathomably large, it's all encompassing, and there's no way for me to, it seems like I'm not experiencing that. I'm having a frustrated existence with a lot of barriers to what, we call it happiness, but harmony or whatever you want to call it, like a kind of naturally occurring existence doesn't seem to be available for humans. There's so much neuroses and
Hmm.
misery and, striving and ambition and violence and all this stuff. And like, why is it like that? The trees are just
Yeah.
growing, or the animals are running around eating food. What's our problem?
Yeah, the
We're
squirrels
in
don't
this
need
higher stage of evolution. What are we doing here?
yeah, the squirrels don't need psychotherapy. Yeah. Yeah, I totally get you, like how language limits our experience. And if you can somehow like release yourself from the tyranny of language and experience life as it is, kind of unfiltered, I think that's, what I was seeking. That kind of like intensity and fullness of
Yeah,
experience that wasn't, yeah, filtered or restricted by conceptual language, nominalism, all that kind of stuff, right?
yeah.
Well,
And I
didn't
mean,
I mean
you
UG
have,
said something like that, right? Like if you were to touch life just once, it would destroy you, something like that.
yeah, I mean, this is where so with JK, he would lead you through with language. He would slow you way down. He would, in his talks, he got very uh, granular.
Hmm.
Okay. You say consciousness, what? Wait, wait, wait. What do you mean by consciousness? And what do you mean by I? And what do you mean by, and that was a real exercise. And I think the fact that that approach had an effect on me when I first was exposed to his writings or whatever his teaching. That I think enabled me to slow down just enough to feel something extraordinary. And which, I mean, you could call it a mystical experience, you could call it a whole bunch of things. It's probably just what happens when you slow down
Hmm.
your thinking and uh, your experience. Something happens in that. I still don't know what that is,
Hmm.
but he was doing that with language.
Hmm.
And then I just got really caught up in like reading the books and focusing concentration on like, well, he's saying, slow down, slow down, slow down, go through. And it always felt like I was, I mean, getting I'm always around the next corner, always around the next corner, always around the next corner. Nothing happened.
Yeah,
Nothing.
there's always something more to deconstruct, and it can seem like an endless project. And I think, some of that's helpful for sure, but you could like remain totally engrossed in that project of deconstruction forever. And to me, that is just like more thinking about thinking.
Yep. And when I revisited his work, let's call it that, and I went to a discussion group, and indeed there I was in a room with like a bunch of like people in the 60-year club, they used to call it, sitting
Mm.
around. Shall we go into the question of, and the language was cliche, tedious, and kind of boring, and it just felt like, oh my God, this is going nowhere, again.
Yeah, that's one thing. Like,
Give a
it's always
room.
kind of like the proof is in the eating of the pudding idea, right? Like, so these people who've been following JK for so many years and applying his methodology of radical self-inquiry, whatever, um, my experience of them is often like they're very intellectual, very head oriented, and often very dry. I said, well, that's not what I'm going for, you know? I want like relaxedness, embodiment, naturalness, spontaneity, eccentricity, all of these things. That's kind of like what I was shooting for, is just to be like kind of unfettered.
Well, I think later, when I met Yuji, it was so completely different that I kind of angrily dismissed JK because there were a few issues, where the relationship that he had been having with this woman for years came out, and it wasn't so much that as that he had pretended that he wasn't doing this thing, and my image of him was this guy who was kind of pure and celibate and didn't have any, and I think partially I was probably coming from my Catholic background,
Hmm.
that this guy was somehow more elevated morally
Right.
than, and the thing with Yuji that was so, I could connect with him so much more was that in his writing, those books, he didn't write them, but in the books, he talked about his personal life and what a mess it was.
Yeah,
You
and
know,
kind of like what a jerk he'd been, like to
yeah,
his children, his family, and stuff, right?
yeah. He
Hmm.
didn't he didn't dress himself up at all.
Hmm.
Um, so he was kind of more, I could trust that,
Hmm.
especially coming out of the Jiddu Krishnamurti experience or image breaking, which was kind of a great thing for me. It was perfect because this thing got totally shattered when I
Right.
met.
There was something there to be shattered.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
And people, so I met Yuji and he was really incomprehensible. I mean, like day one, I just thought I got here too late. He's old and senile. He doesn't know what the fuck he's talking about. He's repeating himself 10 times and like I wasted my trip and then he would look up at me and say, "How are you doing?" And so as soon as these thoughts would come to my mind, he would look at me and kind of I had the strangest sensation that he could hear me thinking, like
Hmm.
he sensed what was up. And
Or even just like an animal sensing of your uptightness or something, maybe.
yeah, but it was way more insight. And maybe it's purely that because he did say, this is nothing, this is a dog barking here. The animal sense is a real thing. I think they are less contained than we are in this bubble of thought.
Oh, for
So,
sure. Yeah.
um,
Hey, I want to take a moment to speak with you about this channel. Currently, only 11% of viewers are subscribed to the channel. I think those numbers are terrible. So if you're enjoying this content and you want to help out the channel, please take a moment right now to like this video and subscribe. And if you really want to help out the channel, you can become a member of the Howl in the Wilderness Patreon, which will give you access to early release of full ad-free episodes, plus access to the archive of the first 100 episodes of this podcast. It would really help me out and allow me to keep creating content like the interview that you're watching right now. Okay, thanks so much. Now, back to the interview.
Yeah, his impact was quite different. Every time I tried to ask a question, I just got blocked at every turn. And I just thought, what am I doing here? Uh, what is the point of this? I can't ask a question. What's the point of me being here? Which is a good question to ask yourself. What is the point of your being here? What do you think you're going to get from this guy?
He would put that question to people all the time, right?
All the time.
He's like, I've
And
got nothing for you. What are you doing here? You bring these questions. It's the same questions everyone else brings. So what? I've got nothing for you.
nothing. And I really hit a wall there. And he said, well, nice meeting you. And first day, nice meeting you. Bye bye. No need to come back. So I said, yeah, see ya. Went home. And then I was at home and I thought, okay, I'm not going to go back. I had just changed jobs, so I suddenly had a lot of free time. And the day after that, I just thought, what the hell? I don't know what's going on there, but I'm certainly not done with this.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
At least, at the very least, it's like a very unique and interesting experience, right? And that in itself is like, I don't know, why, yeah, why would you want to miss out on that? This opportunity to just be with a very unique person.
yeah, yeah, because he reminded me of the image that I had of like old monks, crazy Zen monks in the forest, rolling around on the ground, being idiots, kind of like thing.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. That's what he reminds me more of that than like
it
the
was
Indian
totally
sage.
hero. Yeah.
Yeah.
And,
More
and
feral. Yeah.
yeah. And at times but so I went back and then I was just in it from that point forward. I was just there every day until he left. And then shortly thereafter, I can't remember now the exact sequence, whether I went to California once for 2 weeks and then went
Like
to Switzerland.
Palm Springs when he used to go there.
Yeah.
Hmm.
It might have been actually because I met him in January. I probably I probably went to Switzerland next, which again, the whole thing was very it just was a perfect match for me because I'd always wondered, with Jiddu Krishnamurti giving talks in Ojai was the thing, and then the other talks were in Stade,
Hmm.
Switzerland, which is where UG stayed after his calamity, which happened in the orbit of JK.
Hmm.
And I really felt like as time went on, I realized that I'd hit pay dirt with Yuji because he was the thing that Jiddu was kind of hinting at. I think this is my conviction. I think whatever Jiddu Krishnamurti was talking about, Yuji had attained or whatever, however you would put that. That
Hmm.
was that was the feeling I got.
Yeah. But the way he describes it, it's not really something that was attained because he would say like, you don't want this to happen to you. What happened to me? Um, so it's almost something that like was visited upon him or inflicted upon him or something like that. Like it sounded more kind of violent and disruptive than something
Yeah.
you would want to have happen, right?
Well, it's a mixed bag because yes and no. Yes, it is, I think, a disruption for sure. Because even he said at one point I asked him, and there are some places where he talked about it. He's when this thing happens, he used to repeat this phrase: "If it happens to you, you'll drop dead on the floor right now." And I thought, oh, okay, he's exaggerating. But as time went on, I realized that he wasn't joking, that what this thing does, you can't make happen. Whatever happened to him, you can't make it happen.
Hmm.
And right, he didn't really know, and he was honest to the end about this. He said, I don't know why or how this happened to me. I can't
Yeah,
say,
he would say like in spite of all the sadhana and study and everything that I'd done for like 40 years, in spite of that, this thing happened. It wasn't because of that, but it was like in spite of that, in spite of all the seeking and striving.
I think he said that also because if you say something else, then you're setting the stage for teaching.
Right.
You're
Yeah.
about to tell somebody how they're going to get to where you are.
Hmm.
And I don't think I don't, I think all those things he did were inevitable. That's the person he was.
Hmm.
And as time goes on, I think you can't take one out of the other.
Yeah.
You can't,
Yeah.
it makes total sense. I mean, of course, if I want to learn, if you want to learn a skill, you have to find someone that has that skill and learn it from them. That's sort of practical reality. And I think with this kind of thing, there are people. I'm convinced there are people, and there are cases that are pretty easy to find. Well, if you look around, you can find them of people who, like Ramana Maharshi, spontaneously, this happened to him when he was 16. And Anandamayi Ma seems to have been born as a kind of savant spiritual person. But then you have people like Ramakrishna, Paramahamsa Ramakrishna, who worked really hard at it. And this thing happened to him. And then there are people, there's all kinds of variations on the theme. People they know about, people they don't know much about. Nityananda of Ganeshpur, he was a kid. Nobody really knows the story there.
Hmm.
He may have been, who knows what was up with him. But I don't think these people just, and Yuji would say that people, there are always, I never heard him say it, but other people told me. He said there's always a certain number of people out there that are in this state, you know, and you maybe you don't know who they are. Maybe they're just like some guy working in a supermarket, somebody who's a janitor, a lawyer somewhere. Who knows? We don't know. And they're just not teaching. And
Hmm.
there's a guy named Robert Adams. I don't know if you've heard of him.
No.
He grew up in New York City, and from childhood, this figure would appear on his bed, and this guy in diapers, and he's sitting talking to him, and how is this guy doing here? And he was a kid. His parents thought he had an imaginary friend, so fine. He grows up, and he has these certain. He had he had these abilities from childhood, just strange abilities. And anyway, this led him to eventually look for a teacher, and he found a teacher in New York. Joel Goldstein was some guy in New York who was
Hmm.
teaching about their stuff. And then Goldstein,
Non-dual guy.
yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
I don't know much about him, but he sent
He
he
had a
so
fall from grace.
oh well,
Yeah.
so many. But he eventually ended up in the Yogananda ashram in LA as a teenager. And there was a picture of Ramana Maharshi on the wall.
Right. The guy in the diaper.
And it's the guy in a diaper. And then at 18, he decided that he had to go and meet this guy because he was still alive. So he met Maharshi before he died. But then, people don't know much about him at all. Then there was a group that formed around him in the 90s. And he had Parkinson's and he died by, I think, 2000. So he's another character that was just kind of, I've listened to a lot of his talks. I trust that guy
Hmm.
just because of the way he talks. But he said, I don't know what I did in a previous life or I don't know how this happened to me, but something prepared me for this.
Right.
Yuji, I think what Yuji said is that, not I think, he did say, and you can see the documentation of it, that he worked really hard. He did everything. He risked everything. He went broke. He went crazy. He was having all kinds of spiritual experiences, but he knew that was not it. There were moments in his conversations with JK where he would say, do you think I'm done? And JK would say, no. And when I met him, he was like, I met that guy once and he was full of shit and I never went back to him, and that's not at all the story.
Hmm.
Um, I feel like in his case, it's kind of like the guy that keeps tending the fire until the fire stick catches fire, and then he catches fire, and then he just burns up.
Hmm.
And he said that when it finally happened, he was terrified. I think I'm coming back around in a long-winded way to what I was about to say before, which was that he said when he could see it all coming apart, it scared him. He was really frightened. And that last moment when the calamity, he called it, was going on, he he was lying on a couch and he felt his consciousness was closing like an aperture. And he knew that if what happened, he was done. And it happened and he was done. And after that, he went through a lot of physical changes, and he did yoga for a couple of years to try and deal with the pain of the adjustments to this thing, which it sounds like, what he really, really, one of the things that's so impressive to me about him is that he really avoided all traditional interpretation of these events I feel like, in order to be, to honor the purity of whatever happened to him, and to not give people some kind of false hope that if you do this, you get that. But it seems like whatever we call chakras, and they've now science has like seen there's glands in these areas in your body where the chakras are. He said when that stuff comes back into play, it's very painful. It's been shut down. It reopens, and it's painful. So that kind of approach, or his, insistence on the physicality only of it, was kind of something I could trust, because there's a whole nother dimension of being around the guy, which wasn't like that at all. It was really strange and very kind of horrific and enchanting. Horrific mostly because of what you would go through around him, but also just completely transporting and all kinds of other stuff. I think because, we're all a certain field of energy, we're all the kind of electronic field. And when you're in the orbit of a certain kind of field, it creates certain events happen, or certain circumstances or conditions apply. And you can't really, you can't understand it or anything, but it happens, so many times. You be in the room.
I mean, look, there's a nervous little dog on my lap because I'm relaxed. And so she's kind of co-regulating with me, and she's able to settle into the relaxedness that's around. Yeah, I mean, there it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you got that sense around UG, but sometimes it would be disturbing more than, because I spoke to someone else who hung out with him, and he would say that sometimes you would just drop off and like start drooling, like you would just start sleeping, or you'd be like kind of knocked out in his presence.
That happened the first couple days I was there. Yeah, I mean, I thought it was just boredom, but but you would come to. I remember coming to and feeling like I was at the top of some mountain somewhere. It just felt so blissful and perfect.
Like refreshing.
Completely refreshing. And also not in a way, it was so ordinary and natural that you didn't really think about it.
Right.
Just kind of, if you were to stop and think, you'd go, oh, yeah, this is really amazing. But you'd have to sort of think about that. And the thinking about that happens when you step out of the hotel into, 7th Avenue. You're like, oh my God, the world is still here and it's real. Yeah, and that was my experience for 5 years. I'd be sitting there, he would be talking, and everything made perfect sense until I got up and left the room, and then it was chaos.
Back in the manic world.
Oh yeah, and sometimes in my own mind while I was in the room with him, it was awful.
Because your mind was going off.
Yeah, and I do think that a person like that, their job is to destroy your mind. Which is why he wouldn't answer my questions. Because this, that kind of answering the question becomes a ritual, and then you're dependent on that relationship to do something which is counterproductive to what he's talking about or being.
Which would be like a naturalness.
Yeah.
Without seeking. Yeah. So answering the question would be kind of like feeding that impulse to want to know, and more and more and more.
The problem is the thinking right there. That's it. That's the only problem.
Yeah, you'd say the thinking is the problem. It's one of his great statements.
Yeah,
it's like a Zen koan, right?
Yeah,
It works on you.
There's no problem with thinking, but the thinking is the problem. Like you can't not think. He would say that you'd be a dead corpse if you didn't think. You need it to move around the room, but it's running the entire show. Whereas in his case, the opposite applies. Like he would say on in one of the oldest tapes of his that I've listened to from India in whatever 1967, he said the difference between this and that, meaning him and me, us, whatever, others, is that this is functional and that's ideational. And that's the only difference.
Hmm.
And on his deathbed, I swear to God, the exact phrasing came out.
Hmm.
It's very simple.
Meaning this organism is simply functioning.
That's it.
And what's going on in you is that there's a layer of ideation on top of that functioning and often disturbing it, getting in the way of it.
Constantly disturbing it in order to keep itself going.
Thought, to
In
keep
order
thought going. Yeah.
right. So the narrative thread of the narrative thread is a continuous stream of thought. And we give it words like ego or narrative thread or thought, but it's a certain kind of neurotic energy that's become so entrenched in the habit of mind that we can't get out of it. And then somebody says, here, if you do these things, you'll be able to fix that. And those things that they're feeding you are more of that.
Mm-hmm.
So round and round you go. You may have new experiences, you may have unique experiences, you may have some kind of sensations that come from that. That makes it more addictive,
Mm-hmm.
And so round and round it goes. And it's so simple that it just is maddening. The formula is so simple. There's nothing complicated. And we seem to thrive on the complication. Because
Yeah.
it gives you more to occupy the problem with, the
Yeah.
problem,
One of my
problems to keep its problems going.
yeah.
Right?
One of my favorite statements of his that I often bring into my counseling practice actually is that he said, "You create problems because without a problem to solve, you don't feel like you're living."
Exactly it. Yeah. Listen, speaking of problems, I need to make a quick exit and re-entry. And so that'll take probably 2 minutes.
See, there was no problem. We just took
Not
a little
now.
break.
Nice shirt, by the way.
Oh yeah, this
Oh, this is your enema. Nice.
thought is your enemy. Yeah,
Should be your enema.
it's my
Yeah.
UG's your enema.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. There it
it's
is.
my favorite photo of UG too, where he's wearing this like super fuzzy, cozy looking sweater. I was like,
Yeah.
that's my kind of guru.
Yeah. That's it.
Comfort.
Cashmere, baby. He was never without it.
Yeah. I wonder if she's gonna come on my lap again.
She'll be back. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So how did it go from those first couple meetings, like going to see him, to traveling with him?
Again, I feel like the whole thing was so kind of like just inevitable because I saw him at just a time when I'd given up a full-time job and I started working in as a freelancer. So I had a lot more free time. I would work 2 weeks and I'd be off 2 weeks. So when I decided to spend as much time as possible with him, and I went to Switzerland the first time, and then I don't know, first somehow we just hit it off. I guess I would put it that way. We hit it off, and so he didn't resist my spending time there. And I think if anyone came to him that really wanted to spend time with him, there wasn't anything he could do about it. He kind of had to accommodate that. I think that's the case with these people. Their only real job is to do that, is to
Hmm.
push you into that corner as much as they can figure out how to do that.
Hmm.
And so I think that all unfolded on that basis. I had the means, very limited, but enough to do that. And so I just threw myself into it completely.
Yeah. Was there some kind of goal in mind, or did you just want to hang out with him more as much as
Well,
you
of course,
could?
the goal for me was to be, for lack of a better way of putting it, because it's so wrong and stupid and not the way you're supposed to do, but to be like him, to be like
Hmm.
that was the goal. And I quickly saw and was confronted in many ways by the way that it was not possible to be like him for me. Not just because of, but because of my habits and my desires and my wishes and my wants and my needs and all that stuff. I still identified as an artist and I'm like, I need that. And then I need, and I can't give everything up to this. And, what if he's wrong? Or I don't know what the resistances come in ways you don't even see until they're there.
Hmm.
Mine just showed up in force, and the way he lived was so, um, it was so simple that I couldn't imagine it. I mean, I spent my life making art and I couldn't picture not doing that. And I don't even know if that's really the problem, but it certainly felt like it seems like it was a part of the problem. But I think there are so many things that, you can do so much and then you can only do so much and you just keep trying over and over and over again to absorb the lesson, get the point.
Hmm.
And I don't think that making art is necessarily an obstacle. I don't think anything is. I think it's really the thought which is the obstacle. But the ways in which the thought manifests itself in your behavior become real obvious real fast. I
Yeah.
want this, I want that, I need this, I need that. One of the things about being around him was you couldn't, he didn't leave room for anything but him. In when you were doing that, you were doing that only.
Hmm.
Like, so when I went to see him, I wasn't like dipping out and going to galleries or going to museums or that kind of thing. I kind of left my art career completely behind. I started following him more and more, and because I had freelance work, I could move around the globe, and so I kind of got into this weird limbo where I was kind of in half in one world and half in another world.
Hmm. Wouldn't he say though that that's your choice, that you're free to come and go
Oh
as you
yeah,
please? Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. No, it's
Yeah.
absolutely the case.
And I think the thing about the artist, like my sense of how he might respond to that, is that like the only problem is actually the idea that you should be doing something else other than be an artist, or to simplify your life where you didn't have to do art or something, right?
Yeah.
Like that's the obstacle, is the thought that I should be doing anything other than what I feel like doing.
Yeah, and really it's kind of not even a very good excuse because the stuff he's talking about is so much more fundamental that it doesn't really, being an artist doesn't really even have anything to do with it. It doesn't really have to interfere with it. I think probably now that we're talking about it, because I've given it a lot of thought. I mean, he at one point wanted to be a writer and he spent a lot of time working on this autobiography with Valentine. And then when this thing happened, he burned it and he kind of talked a lot about that. But again, I don't think that's really the issue. I think the issue is more the thing he's talking about is sit still and stop, and slow down and stop. And I mean, I've been thinking about it a lot lately because a friend of his had a birthday recently. This guy that lives in Bangalore, he was a soldier. His name is Major. Major disaster for the Indian Army is what UG used to call him. And he's a really sweet guy, and he was a very traditional Indian in many ways, but then in other ways, here he was an army guy, but in a family that had nothing to do with the army, he was very identified with Anandamaya and Ramana Maharshi, and then he met Yuji, and Yuji was like really radical, and so he went for it. He spent a lot of time with UG, and he at one point said, "I need a sadhana. I need you to tell me what to do."
Hmm.
And UG said, stand still and surrender. Not to anybody, not to any gods, not to anything, just to yourself, to surrender.
Hmm.
And Major at that point was living, he always found these spots for him. Like there was a coffee plantation in Erkod, which is a remote hill station in India. And now Major is living in this farmhouse in Bangalore for the last 20 some years longer. And for some reason, so I remember him saying that. And, his advice to us was just shut up. He said, your job in life is to shut up. And that's about as radical as you can get, but it's very simple. And all of the mantras and all of the meditation and all the practice and all the rest of it boils down to that silence. And Ramana Maharshi said it, and Nisargadatta said it, and they all say the same thing. Chumairu is the phrase that Maharshi used to say to people. Just shut up.
Zip it. Yeah.
And you can zip it physically for years, and there are people in India that do this. They tie themselves in knots to force something like that. And they go crazy, or they one day just go ape shit. They, go way back to doing whatever they were doing before. You can go crazy if you push it with these things. But he said, and there was a point, I think, where he said he went crazy, and I think he meant that. He felt like he was going insane even before the calamity. There were things he had gone through various things like this headless state, and he describes a few of the things that he was going through.
These kind of states of dissociation, like when he was in the audience at JK's talks and wouldn't be able to feel his body, or he went into a strip club, I think in Paris once, and couldn't tell if he was on the stage dancing or if he was watching them dance. Like there was that real sense of, dissociation, kind of merging, which could be considered like a samadhi experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
Samadhi in a strip club. That's the name of his memoir.
Yeah. Yeah, he had a good time with that. Oh my God. He said,
well, he was very provocative, right? Like he liked
totally.
to ruffle people's morality feathers.
And this is what's interesting is that he wasn't alone in that. And the beauty of him was like that there's the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna is a great book, but in translation, it's a watered down milk toast version of a very raucous guy. Apparently had a mouth like a truck driver. And
really?
All of that has been washed out of the translation because one of Yuji's best friends, or one of his closest, this guy that followed him ardently for years, his name is Guha, Sabyasachi Guha. And he's a Bengali. And Yuji said, you get that book and you read it in the original. And he said he couldn't believe what he was reading. Like, oh my God, he said that. Oh, he said that. Oh my goodness, that's what's in there. Things like, I see God in the cunt of that dog over there being fucked. That was one of his lines. That's just one. And I apparently they have quite a flowery cursing language, over there.
Yeah.
And this guy was a farm boy, or from a farm town. So he was a rural, unschooled.
Right. He was a bumpkin.
Yeah, bumpkin. And, his mouth was, and it's funny because Nisargadatta was also like a Marathi guy. He spoke Marathi and he lived in Mumbai, and nobody gave a shit about him until Maurice Friedman wrote a book in English about him.
I am that.
All the Westerners showed up, and then he became famous.
Right. And he had, like, for people who don't know, he had a little BD store, like a little tobacco shop.
Yep. And his guru is kind of said, look, you think you know what you are, you're mistaken. Just look, have a look. And he whatever you want to call it happened to him a couple of years after his guru died, and then he went back to his cigarette shop, and he just talked to the locals, and most of them thought he was crazy, and until the Westerners showed up, and then then he got legitimized by
Hmm.
white people, which is sadly what happens. Um, but yeah, I mean, so what are we talking about here? The simplicity of the whole thing, really. Silence, shut up. And you can't make that happen. The only thing you can do, I don't know, UG used to say shut up, and then at some point he would tell someone else, he said, um, if you try to see where the separation is happening between you and what's going on around, maybe that could work.
Right. Just look for that distance from the kind of cognitive interpretation of reality and actual reality. If you can get like that, if that crack opens up just a little, maybe it loosens the stranglehold of the mind.
Yeah, and what's telling is too that I mean the beauty of meeting these guys, and I think instinctively the reason that I just decided that that was going to be it for me. I don't believe that there are that many of these people out there or have been, and because I think it's very rare, and so I decided that I would spend all the time I could with him because watching him and being around him was so much more than what he was saying.
Hmm.
It was like 99% more than what he said because so many things went on where I had an interaction with him and he could just immediately see where I was going in a direction and he would just shut it down in ways that you can't do by just talking to people.
Hmm.
You couldn't do it in a lecture hall or whatever. I mean, his point was these people don't make themselves available to you because they want to be special or whatever. But if you put yourself in, you really put yourself in that company, then you're getting into something. You better be ready for it because that's where the teaching kind of whatever that means, whatever that exposure will do it to you. Will
Yeah,
do
like it'd be
whatever.
more like a nonverbal, what's the word? It's like transmission, maybe, or being around them through osmosis. Maybe you start to naturalize, or
Well, it's like what you're saying about the pup. She's sitting there because it feels right.
Mhm.
Not what you're saying. It's your energy.
Yeah, if it didn't feel right, I could spend all day trying to coax her onto my lap, and she just wouldn't, unless she was really kind of beaten down, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, yeah. Um, I totally get it. Like the kind of the desire to just be around someone like that. Like for me, the way I imagine the experience would be like, and from what I've heard from others, is that I'd be able to relax because I knew this person didn't have any expectation for how I should act or be, because they're so kind of relaxed in themselves. And so that's what I imagine, like when people drop off and start drooling, it's like finally they can just relax and then poof, they're out.
There's that. And then there's the part where you um you put yourself in that situation and then you have to deal with being there.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
That means like you get in the car at 7 in the morning and he says, we're going to Zurich. And you drive 3 hours to Zurich, have a coffee, and then he says, and now we're going to Cologne. And you're like, I'm really tired. I don't feel like driving. And he's like, you can leave anytime you want, but we're going to Cologne and you drive to Cologne. And then he says, okay, now we're going back to Stadt. Now it's 6 hours back to there. And you're following some guy in a car whose way of driving you don't agree with. And, you're dealing with that. And, or the people in the car who are, you have an issue with this one or you have an issue with that one. There's
Yeah,
all of
it's gonna bring up all your hangups.
that's it.
Yeah. No, I totally get that. At some point in my life, when it's kind of like post UG, and I had some experiences after listening to him, lying in bed, and all these thought constructs just kind of floating away from me. And every time one of them exploded or dissolved, I just started giggling like uncontrollably, which
Yeah.
isn't in my nature.
Yeah.
But it was this feeling of like being liberated from all these like ideas about myself and the world. And then kind of following that, I was like looking for ways to be triggered, and I joked that I'd make a t-shirt at the time when people were giving out like safe space and trigger warnings and all that kind of thing. I wanted to make a shirt that said hashtag trigger me. So I was like, I
Yeah.
want to know where my my
Yeah.
hangups are so that I can like unravel them or release them. And so like showing
Yeah.
up for some of that, like I know it's going to bring up all my shit, but I'm in for it. I want to be free.
No, and that's the thing where you can't, that's the thing that's so unique about these guys. Like it can be so brutal that way, but you're not going to get that anywhere else.
Hmm.
Your friends are going to be nice,
Yeah.
because they want something from you. This is
They
the
want
key.
they want the
People
nice
say,
guy.
well, the point he made, which is very tough to bring up with your family and friends, is that the only relationship you have with someone is what you're getting out of it.
Right.
And that's not something you want to hear on a first date, you know? What have you got that I can exploit, baby? Let's go have fun. I've got money, you've got some nice, let's go have some fun. What do you say? Here's a guy who didn't want anything from you.
Hmm.
He didn't need anything from anybody. And I think that created a space where where the dynamic was completely different
Hmm.
because there was no vested interest on his part. And so he could just do whatever, he felt necessary to push you into that corner, which other people would never dare do. He would
Yeah.
bring up the most humiliating, embarrassing, or put you in a situation that was just so awful.
Hmm.
And you either dealt with it or left.
Yeah.
Uh,
It's almost like if you were willing to kind of stick in there with him, he was like, okay, you want
yeah.
freedom? I'm gonna like show you all the spots where you're
You
hung
think
up.
you want freedom?
Yeah.
Here we go.
Yeah, like the way Mark would talk about him, he'd say, being with UG was like being with a cat, no agenda. I
Yeah,
thought
man.
that was nice, like being with a cat. But I'm like, I've
Yeah.
met cats with agendas.
Yeah. They have them.
But it's a
Yeah.
nice thought that, it's like being with an animal.
Yeah. It's a little more complicated than an animal,
Yeah,
though.
yeah, I know.
I mean, that's the part that's kind of interesting about it that, yeah, I mean, from the beginning to the end, it was so unpredictable.
Hmm.
That's the other part that when he was gone, right, as soon as like when I left for the last time, he hadn't died yet. He died a week later, but I knew I wasn't going to see him again. And every mile put between us felt like I was ascending into heaven, this kind of relief of, oh my
Uh,
God, over. Oh my God, finally it's over. Uh,
hmm.
but at some point, I also thought, not at some point, I was also really conscious of the fact that I didn't want to lose the intensity that he had brought into my life.
Hmm.
And that, so I don't even know what that, uh, it's hard to say what that means. The kind of rigor that he exerted around him was something you couldn't really just didn't come across that in life ever. And the
Well,
intimacy of it was like
right.
profound.
Yeah, but that willingness, I mean, it's something I run into in my counseling practice. A lot of times people come to me because they're at the end of the road in terms of like seeking help for their problems, and they've gone to the typical therapists who are very affirming of their emotions and their thoughts, and they show up and come to me because they want to be challenged, and
Yeah.
they want their feet kind of held to the fire, right? So maybe that's like the intensity you're talking about is like, this desire to be free. And here's someone who's not going to like bullshit me or just kind of like affirm.
Yeah, I think also that yeah, I don't know. There's so many things about it because there was a feeling of gratitude for everything that had happened and having met him, and it's such a mixed bag.
Hmm.
And I also did spend some time trying to find if there were a couple of people that I thought, well, maybe this person has the same, they can play that role, you know.
Hmm.
It wasn't there at all, you know. It wasn't there. And I think that was a lesson in itself. Just that, yeah.
Was there something about the group of people that hung around him? Like I imagine from everything I know, there was like a lot of really interesting, creative outsider types that hung around him, and I can imagine that sense of like camaraderie or belonging, as an outsider who's not seeking the same things as other people, that might have been like just an enjoyable experience too.
Yeah, it was. That was something that was great after he went. That the people, and mind you, some of these people were. What was interesting is the variety of types that came to see him: lawyers, doctors, housewives, artists, musicians, spiritual counseling people, psychologists, a construction guy. Like a real variety of people. But since he died, the people, like those are the people that I feel most comfortable opening up with about that experience because they were there.
Hmm.
And it's such a unique experience that having that contact, which I maintain to this day with the people there, and like they're very different from me. Some of them are, and one of the weird things was like, I went on the road in 2005 after he died. Right before he died, I was sort of taking care of him at the end, nursing him, like nursing, whatever that means, picking him up so he could go to the bathroom, basically.
Hmm.
Uh, and so I went on the road in 2005, and then I lived that way for 10 years because I was trying to like see what that would, if I could loosen my ties a bit. Um, but in doing that, I mixed with a lot of different people, and I always had this feeling like I'm kind of like, again, I'm in limbo in a way. I'm out here. My purpose was to write this book about the experience. That was my excuse, actually. It was kind of like I needed something to do, and I needed an excuse. And people always are more respectful if they think you're a writer. They're like, oh, he's special. Oh, meanwhile, you're just some jerk off with a typewriter. But they don't need to know that. No, I mean, so it gave me a sense of purpose as well as I was doing all this. But the great thing was I maintained contact with people around the world who knew him. And it was always kind of like a way station to talk with people about that experience.
Hmm.
Yeah, you could refuel. And it's still like that. I mean, a
Hmm.
friend of mine who's just was evacuated last week from her house because of that fire. And, she's had some struggle in her life, and she's got three small kids, and the fire happens and she's out of the house, and she's somebody who still thinks about him all the time. And that is somehow helpful. We can kind of talk about that. Well, one of the things you learned around him was you better be ready to drop everything, like living on the road. We literally did do a 4-day trip. We were supposed to go for coffee, and we were gone for 4 days. with nothing, like no clothing, no change of clothes, no toothbrush, nothing. You're on the road for 4 days.
Hmm.
Went to Cologne so we went to Freiburg, then Cologne, then uh, Antwerp, then Holland, then Amsterdam, then back to Cologne, then Paris, and people were starting to think, my God, is this going to end, at some point? Because you got 3 cars of this madness, and the one woman who had spilled gasoline on her skirt day one. So that stink was in the car for 4 days. I mean, just the like crazy shit like that. But you realize at the end of the day, you survived it.
Hmm.
Need all that stuff. You're still alive. You go to a city, you show up, you get a hotel room, you go buy some toothpaste and a toothbrush and, get up in the morning and do it all over again. So,
Yeah, there's something about that that I think is just great. Like, that you don't have to retreat from the world in order to have the experience of like learning non-attachment. Like you don't
right.
have to go off into the mountains into a monastery, but you can do it out in the world, going to coffee shops and shopping malls and gas stations. And that to me is like so much more kind of practical.
Well, it was very practical, and that's one of the things he said. Again, my friend Chandrasekhar wrote this book called "Stopped in Our Tracks," which is a great little book of
Mm.
stories about Yuji. And one of the stories in there is that Yuji and Valentine were meant to come on a Sunday, and they showed up Saturday night. And he's in the middle of this giant event at this school that he runs, and there's Yuji and Valentine at the door. It's 4 o'clock, and they patiently wait for the thing to end, and he's like, the house is not prepared. There's nothing in it. They rented a place for them. There was no furniture, no cooking. And usually just said, don't worry, we'll have dinner there tonight. And he said, okay. And they went to the market and they bought all the stuff they needed, had it delivered, set it up, made dinner, done.
No problem.
Yuji looked at him and he said, this is not some special mystical state. This is efficiency at its height.
Mm.
It's a very efficient way of living. It's the
Yeah.
most effective, simplest way to be alive.
Hmm. Yeah. I get that from him. It's like the most important thing is to be responsive to what's actually happening. And that's it. If you can be responsive and be ready for it, or
Yeah.
not even anticipating it, but just be like an animal is responding to what's going on in their environment.
Yeah. He said, you guys are all running around acting, or sorry, reacting. You're all
Right.
reacting. No one's taking action. You're reacting. You're not acting. And that was like another one of those little koans, like, oh, he's right.
Hmm.
Think about it all the time. Just do it.
Hmm. Yeah. What's stopping you?
I think this is where you realize, or what I realized was that my desires and my, wishes to be something where the only thing that makes you miserable is the want, this desire, the want to
Yeah.
be something, anything, whatever it is, different than what's exactly where you are right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anything. It can be very simple or very complicated, but anything.
Hmm.
And that question, what do you want? He used to say it, if you want one thing, you're fine. You'll get it. But try that. One thing. He
Hmm.
wanted one thing.
Yeah. At
Just
any given moment, wanting one thing. Yeah.
he only wanted to realize what state those guys were in that he was told was enlightenment or whatever it was. That's all he wanted. He
Hmm.
threw himself into that and that's all he wanted. That's what he said. The only thing he wanted. And he did it, you know.
Right. And like less lofty things maybe later. It's like you want a cup of coffee? Okay, get a cup of coffee.
Yeah. Yeah.
You want to go to
In
the
the
shopping
home,
mall and walk around? Go to the shopping mall.
exactly. If you think going to the shopping mall is a second class thing, you would have preferred to go to the movies, right away you're in trouble.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
Hmm.
know, we could do, but we could also be, like that stuff.
Yeah. Or I want this. Oh, there's only a kind of shoddy discount store. I'd much rather if there was like a boutique store and have a nicer pot or something.
Well,
Yeah.
that's the funny thing too, because we'd go on these shopping trips, and well, the first outing we went on when I met him in New York was to the Short Hills Mall, where we had a coffee and he went shopping for a silk shirt, And
Which I'm
I'm
guessing
all
is just like
thinking,
a typical American mall.
yeah, and I'm like, what the hell am I doing in this mall with this guy? I haven't been to a mall since I was a teenager, the King of Prussia Mall. We used to go hang out and, escape the house. But here we are at the mall going to, or Ross's Dress for Less in the middle of the desert in California, or, some other hole, or Bergdorf's or something. It didn't matter.
Mhm.
He was moving around buying crap, And mind you, he had, his life was so reduced. I remember putting everything in storage and thinking, okay, now I put everything in storage. I left my furniture, my, I left everything except all my artwork and all my books in storage. But still, that was like, that's not leaving everything, because when I went back to his apartment after he, that final week he was alive, he had an apartment in Switzerland, and I went back there because I was living upstairs, and I went into his apartment, and it was like there's one container of cream in the refrigerator. There's a pair of shoes and a jacket and, a calendar and a clock and maybe a folder somewhere with some legal papers. That's it.
Mhm.
And that's the way he lived. And me,
I know we think we're downsizing if we can fit everything in a 4x8 storage unit.
right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I maintained that storage unit like it was the treasure of Fort Knox, for that whole 10 years. I kept that going.
Hmm.
But I also think it's a mistake to think, that you should copy that precise
Yeah.
life.
I was going to
It's
say,
not
like,
a
it's
mistake.
okay to have nice things and tools of the trade and whatever, as long as there's like a contentment with it, right? Like you're not too hung up on it. It doesn't define you. You're not always wanting more. So it doesn't mean like you got to get rid of everything to be in your natural state. But like, what's something that Mark would say, the kind of thing UG would tell him is like, don't be in conflict with your cup of coffee. Like if
Yeah.
you want the coffee, just enjoy the coffee. It's the conflict about, oh, am I drinking too much coffee? I should be drinking less. That's the thing that's killing you.
Yeah. Yeah. That's exactly it. It's too simple.
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't present another problem to solve, so we don't want it.
Kind of remarkable.
I know. That's like the thing that frustrated me kind of early on in starting to work with people, after having these experiences, is that I'd be able to see like that the problems that people were presenting were just so unnecessary.
Yeah.
And that if they could just drop it, then they'd be okay. But like, how do you can't force that on someone. You can't make them drop it. And so then the approach became like, well, how can I like his idea, like you create problems because without problems to solve, you don't feel like you're living. So I took that as like a kind of Zen koan. I said, well, if you want to help people, help them connect more to life, help them feel more alive. So kind of like a negative, positive approach to that, creating problems. Because if they feel like they're alive, then they're not going to need to create so many problems to solve. You know what I mean? That became the only way that I could kind of like operationalize this realization.
So you created problems for them so they could feel more alive?
No, I tried to help them feel more alive.
Yeah, no, I'm making a joke that, yeah, the only way to do that is to create a problem for them.
Yeah.
It is tricky. I mean, in the work that I do, I've found one of the things that he says is it said, which has it comes around, and it's funny how the simple comments are what, people aren't listening, people are not communicating, and this is nothing profound from him alone, but I have a job where I have to manage people, and I manage like 100 people sometimes for an event. And I've had conversations where there's a conflict and someone wants something, and you try to explain to them why they can't have it or why it has to be another way. And I've experienced it so many times. I think I've explained it. I don't think there's any other way I could explain it. And it's completely lost on them what I've just said
Hmm.
because people aren't listening. Not most of the time, people are only listening to what they want to hear. And not, again, this is nothing new for him, but he did say, "You're not listening to me, you're listening to yourself."
Hmm.
He'd say it over and over again. And I've had that experience with myself. Yeah, I don't know. I suppose what I don't know what I'm saying here, except that I don't know how I don't know how you do what you do because I don't know how I would do it. I mean, I think listening is huge. It
Hmm.
must be a huge part of your job.
It's mostly listening. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think people can feel and another passage in that book that was interesting was a woman whose son died and she was a good friend of his and he just said, "We have to go and visit her." So they went, they visited, and she was crying and she was upset. And he just sat there,
Hmm.
say a word. And and then, you know, and then he said, "Okay, time to go." And he left, didn't say a word. But I think, again, and I've had this experience with people, if someone is listening to you, that's huge. If they're
Hmm.
not trying to present something to you, they're just listening to you. It's something that rarely happens in the world because
Yeah.
everybody's so eager trying to get something.
Yeah, or to kind of help fix your problem or to steer you in a direction or something like that. And I really think like that's a big part of my job is showing up, listening to people, giving them a space where they feel like they can let down their guard. That to me is therapeutic because it's so rare in our world to have a space where someone is actually listening to you, and like not judging you and not expecting anything from you, which is kind of contrary to like mainstream therapy where you're supposed to like get clear on the goals. Okay, this is where we're headed and this is what the expectations are, and if we don't meet those goals we got to like change the treatment and all this kind of thing. But just to open up a therapeutic space where you can just be, let down your guard, open up, relax.
Yeah, I think having a model is a problem.
Hmm.
If you can avoid that, it seems like that would be that would be kind of remarkable. I mean, yeah, how to do that? Just
Or
listen.
having models, but like really being aware that they're just standing in for something. That they're like a tool that you can use to help orient yourself, but that it's all provisional. There's no model that actually represents reality, or no model that you should fit yourself into. But you can use them provisionally.
Yeah,
But to have that kind of relaxed attitude, even with models, I think is rare too, because a lot of therapists, spiritual teachers, whatever, they really rely on those models.
yeah, yeah. People need a blueprint somehow.
Yeah. Hmm. How did I'm curious, like as an artist, like how did being with UG affect your art making, or did it at all? Or did you just carry on?
I just carried on. I mean,
Hmm.
I really did think that I was going to give it up at some point, or I would just try to like, yeah, I don't know. I think it's just kind of inbuilt. You do it, you know, you do it out of some urge, urgency. What's the difference?
Yeah.
Urge or urgency? I don't know. I, because I work in the art world also, I realize like I'm basically conflicted about the thing. If I stop and think about it, I get conflicted immediately. Like, you know, the world that I see people, the collectors, the people with money that are, you know, their politics and all that stuff that I could judge harshly, or the dynamic of like wanting to be recognized for something you do, all this stuff. that's all one thing, but then there's this just simple joy of making stuff. So I'm kind of stuck with that, whether I like it or not, because I don't really have a very good sense of, um, you know, making money as an artist is it's a real, there's a combination of skill and luck,
Hmm.
involved in it. You have to have a certain discipline and, yeah, I mean, it's work. It's real work.
Yeah, and it's got a lot to do with the timing. I think like if your work is meeting some kind of desire in the marketplace at the right time, or if it's kind of, yeah, I don't know, reflecting something of the culture back that feels significant. It's a tough one. It's not something I think
Yeah.
you can make happen always, but I don't know. Maybe there are some artists who are very calculated in the kind of work they do, like someone like a
There's
Jeff Koons, I think,
yeah, there's Jeff Koons, and there are people that can make the same painting over and over again, and just like, and it's like printing money. And then there's some people that do that, but they are genuinely trying to solve a problem, and I respect that. And in the end, I feel like it's just a thing, it's just
Yeah.
something, and it's an amazing human thing to do.
Hmm.
Uh, you know, it's kind of miraculous that you do it, and yeah.
Hmm.
I don't know. He used to make fun of me, like shameless, like you're the worst painter I've ever met in my life. You'll never sell those paintings. No one will ever want that crap. I wouldn't buy it if I wouldn't wipe my ass with that, all the rest of it. And I said, thanks very much. It's terrific. Thanks, buddy. Thanks for the help, motherfucker. But he was so funny about it that I couldn't help, I don't know. I think he knew I couldn't do anything about it. I'm just stuck, so.
Yeah, it sounds like that kind of friendly ball breaking that is a kind of national pastime here in Canada. And,
Yeah.
Mark said the same thing. It's like in New Zealand and Canada are very similar. We're both part of the Commonwealth. And so there's some of that same attitude. He'd say it's just how us men show each other love.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do some good
Yeah, you
natured
too,
ball
buddy.
busting.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think I mean, the thing about him was he was so, yeah, I mean, you just felt like whatever was going to happen, it was not going to be a bad thing when it was around him. Anything that came out of it was, I just trusted him. People were like, how can you put up with that behavior, and you
Mm.
just, it's like you see what's going on and you just deal with it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think like if we could have that attitude toward everybody, right? And like, then, if you want to be around that, whatever, or not, whatever, but just kind of like allowing people to be who they are. And then it's your choice whether you want to hang with that or not.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think I have inclinations to the hermit life, so it's kind of perfect.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, it cracks me up that I've ended up in a house. Actually, I've by luck and happenstance, I ended up buying a house 3 years ago, 4 years ago, and never in my existence did I imagine or want this, and now
Mm.
it's the thing. So
Yeah, the hermit crab with his house is,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Um, I'm feeling some of that urgency I spoke of earlier. My coffee's hitting me. So
yeah,
I think it's a good time to wrap or
yeah. I think we've said enough.
yeah.
Covered it.
Thanks a lot, man. It's been really nice hanging with you.
Talk to
And
you, bro. Thank
yeah.
you. Right.
And I'll put some links to your book and you got a website for your art?
I do. I have to pay my dues on it. I was just reconsidering whether I would continue it, but there's always Instagram, so that seems to be the website at the moment. So
Yeah. I'll put links in there too if people want to check out your work, which is really great, by the way.
thank you. Thanks so much, Brian.